Hi, welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman, and today I'm going to be presenting to you week number 13 of my Scrappy quilt blocks, and this one is Poinsettia Blossoms. I am a few days behind in getting this video posted for you. I have been very ill with a head cold, and as you can tell by my voice, it's a little deeper than normal, but at least I think today you should be able to understand me. I can speak better today than I've been able to the rest of this week. Before we get started learning how to make the Scrappy Poinsettia block, I want to just mention behind me is my new Lacy Trees quilt. I just designed this and started putting it together. It is not quilted yet. I've just finished piecing it. It's a great quilt where you get to use your stash of strips, and I chose to use blue and green strips from my stash as well as lace, and I'm going to show you tomorrow how you can put those blocks together as well as the quilt itself. I think you'll enjoy it, so stick around. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll be notified when all of my videos get posted. Now let's take a look at the poinsettia block here, and it's a very simple one to put together. I think you'll enjoy it. I've got a PDF that is attached in the description box. Make sure that you download it. I also have a sample of a quilt that you can easily make from this block. It's simply the blocks. There are 16 of them here, and this is using a triple border. You can make that triple border in any width that you want. But what a great way to use up your scrap stash and make each and every poinsettia blossom block a different color from your scraps. I think it would create a beautiful springtime quilt that you can start making now. Or also the poinsettia, maybe you could do a purse or a tote bag or a pillow with this one. Let's see what you actually need for each of these blocks. For each of these blocks, you are going to pull 4 of the 5-inch squares from your scrap stash. So I simply pulled my tubs out. I pulled my 2.5-inch tubs, my 5-inch tubs, and my 4.5-inch tubs to grab my stash. So here's my 5-inch squares, 4 of those. I needed 4 of my 4.5-inch squares that are red for the poinsettia, and you can of course choose any colors you want, darks or mediums. I chose 4 of the 2.5-inch greens, and they're making the stems or the leaves for the poinsettia block. And I've chosen 8 of the 2.5-inch light squares. Those squares are going to go in the corners of each block, and these 2.5-inch squares are also going to snowball the rectangles or snowball the squares. And I'm going to show you how that's done. It's a really simple process. So you'll notice on the PDF, make sure that you download that from the description box, but it indicates for the 4 5-inch squares that you're going to be pulling in light, you're going to need to make rectangles out of them, and the end result, the rectangle has to be 2.5 by 4.5 inches. So we're simply going to stack these up, and we are going to cut them in half, and then we're just going to cut off a 1/2 inch from the length, and we'll obtain our 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. All right, so I've got them stacked, and I'm using my ruler here to cut them in half. So we have 8 2.5 by 5-inch rectangles at the moment, and now we need to cut off a 1/2 inch from the length. And so I'm doing that. And now we have 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, and we have 8 of them. And that's what we need. Now we're going to take all of this to the sewing machine, and we're going to get started on the block. So the first thing I'm going to do is take 4 of the 2.5-inch light squares, and I have simply turned them over to the wrong side, and I've drawn a diagonal line, a light diagonal line from corner to corner. And I'm going to be using these light squares to snowball one corner of each of the red squares. So we're going to line up the patch or the square onto the 4.5-inch square so that the diagonal line goes from side to side, just like this. And then when I sew on this, I'm going to sew just on the inside of that diagonal line, which will allow for the turn of cloth. So I'm sewing just a hair or two closer to the corner as I sew along that. So I'm not sewing directly on the diagonal line. It just will allow for the turn of the cloth when we press this back. And you'll see what I mean here in just a minute. Let me sew this. right, so I have sewn just to the side of that, and then when I bring this back, I'm going to finger press it here, and that red square has been snowballed. And what we're going to do then is flip this open and trim away this excess. You don't want to trim away the snowball portion. You want to keep that there. But we are going to trim away this excess. And I'm just using a scissors here to cut that away. Cut that about a quarter of an inch. And that square is snowballed. We're going to do the same thing to all 4 squares with one of the light squares. Let me do that and I'll be right back. All right, so I have all 4 of them snowballed. These have been finger pressed and the excess fabric has been trimmed away from the back. And this last one now has the fabric trimmed away from the back. So I'm flipping it like this and I'm simply cutting, leaving a quarter of an inch seam allowance. And then you flip it back and you have a snowballed square. So we've done that with all 4. Now we're going to snowball 4 of the rectangles with the green squares. All right, so I'm going to snowball each of the white rectangles, or 4 of the 8 white rectangles are going to be snowballed with a green square. And I have drawn a diagonal line across the back side of a green square and placed it right sides together, so the diagonal line is right there. I'm going to sew just to the right side of that line so that it's closer, the stitching line is closer to the corner, and that will just allow for the turn of fabric when I flip it over and cut away the excess. So let me go ahead and sew all of those and I'll be right back and show you what that looks like. I like to sew mine in assembly line fashion, and that ensures that I am sewing the square and snowballing the same side of each rectangle. You don't want to snowball opposite sides of the rectangle or you're not going to get the same look. I guess you could certainly do it if you wanted to. It'll give a variation to your black. But I've just made sure that these are all sewn on that side of the rectangle, and then I'm going to separate them, trim away the excess, and then press them to the right. And then I'm going to press all of this and I'll come back and lay out the black. By the way, with all of these little pieces, these triangles that you're trimming off, you could actually stitch another seam line there, and you'd end up with probably about a 1.5 inch half square triangle that you could press open, square it up, and add it to your 1.5 inch scrap bin, and those would be half square triangles that are all ready for you to use in another project. So instead of tossing them in the trash, you could certainly use those. Before we lay the parts of the block out to sew it together in rows, it's really important that you square up each of these snowballed squares so that they truly are 4.5 inches, and square up each of these rectangles that are snowballed so that they are 2.5 by 4.5 inches. That's very important. You want to make sure you do that first, and then we're going to go lay out the block and put the rows together. So now you'll see that I have the block laid out. There are 4 rows that I'm going to be putting together, and we start with the 2.5 inch lights in the corner, and then we have rectangles, and make sure that your rectangles are all facing in the correct position, and make sure that your red squares are all facing in the correct position. Okay, I'm back. Bailey, our Boston Terrier, needed some attention, so I've taken care of that. Now what I'm going to do is simply put this block together, and I'm going to web it together, which is how I typically always put my blocks and quilts together, which means I've got it all laid out in here next to my machine. I'm going to take the first square in the second row and flip it over on the first, and I will start sewing, and I will work my way down these 2 rows, and then I will add the 3rd row and then the 4th row. And let me show you how this is done. So I have my Poinsettia Blossoms block all put together. I am now going to take it and press it. I'll try to press seams to one side as I go through the block and make sure that I press them all. And then it's important that you square up the block to 12.5 inches. Let me go take care of that and I'll be right back. I have two of my Poinsettia Blossom blocks ready here. I have pressed the seams in opposite directions, row by row, if possible. That doesn't always mean your darks are going to press to the darks, but do what you can to make sure that it lays nicely. And then I did square it up to 12.5 inches. I'm really enjoying this pattern. It's a beautiful pattern, very simple to make, and I'm looking forward to making a wonderful quilt with a lot of my scraps, making each blossom in a different color from my scraps. So that's going to be fun. Take advantage of the quilt pattern that I've attached in the PDF. It's on the second page of the PDF. And just have fun with it. There are no sashings in this particular design here, but I don't think you even need it, although you could certainly add that. That would certainly use up a lot more of your scraps. So I hope you've all enjoyed the Poinsettia Blossoms Scrappy block for week 13. I can't wait to hear from you. Let me know what you're going to do with it, if you're going to make a tote, a purse, a pillow, or a quilt. I'd like to hear from my viewers and find out what you're going to be doing with these Scrappy blocks. Don't forget to create a playlist of all of my Scrappy block weeks. I'm on week number 13 right now, and there's going to be a total of 52 weeks of Scrappy block patterns that I'll be giving to you. So you want to make sure you create a playlist, make sure you subscribe and like. That really does help my channel to get to other quilters. And don't forget to stop by tomorrow. I'm going to be demonstrating how to make the beautiful lacy tree quilt block here tomorrow. So check back with me on that. Thank you so much. Have a great evening and happy quilting.